Back in the 90s, I worked at a small local sporting goods store. It was decent sized, but far from the ones like today. You know the ones. I worked there when I was younger because it was super laid back, and for the time, I made decent money for a teenager. I was one of the stocking associates, so I would help open boxes, fill shelves, organize, things like that. There were a lot of older folks that worked there too, so it was easier to have us younger kids doing the heavy lifting. While it was a job, I still had fun with it though, as I was pretty athletic. I loved baseball and played on my high school team as well as swimming, but I also liked hiking and hunting too. So when we got new supplies, it was almost like Christmas as I went through the items, checked what they did, tried them out, if it wasn't in packaging of course. The even better part about all of it was that I worked the later shift, like 4 to midnight, because again, the older employees didn't work that late. Now there aren't a lot of people out buying golf clubs and camping gear at 10, 11 o'clock at night, so most of us just fooled around in the store with the supplies or just read magazines from the front. My boss Rick at the time was also really cool about it. He typically stayed in his office after 8 or 9 and would come out occasionally to ask us to do something or to check on us, but since he trusted us, we were pretty much left to our own devices. I like to check out the camping equipment myself since I often went with my dad. We had a few full-size tents set up on a wide metal shelf-like awning. One of them I wanted to save up for because I thought it would be really convenient for us. It was a little longer and had a separator in the center, so it made it look like there were 2 different rooms. I think it was to be used more like a mud room or maybe to hold your belongings so as to not take up space where you sleep. But I thought it would work for us since I got mine from a thrift store and it hardly zipped up. That way we could share one or just have an extra place for our stuff and know it was secure. We also sold guns and ammo at the time, so I was always telling my dad what we had and when we would get new items. These were just some of the few things I did in our downtime, but don't worry, it is relevant to the story. So one of the other perks of working the late shift is inventory. The thing was, it was the 90s, so we did most of it by hand. This also went overnight, so most of us took turns on that shift. I didn't mind doing it, but if I had a choice, I wouldn't have. Sometimes it was good, but other times were a struggle depending on what was going on the day before or even who I worked with. You know the type, the ones that complain about everything, never stop talking, has a million problems. Call me whatever, but it can make the shift a drag. So it was my turn to do inventory, and I was working with Ed, Casey, and Laura. We did it by departments to make sure we covered each part and did it correctly, with 2 of us in one department at a time. As we made our way around the store, we got to the camping equipment. The tents that were on display weren't part of the inventory count, so normally I wouldn't even give them a second glance. But I saw a backpack sitting next to one of them. When I grabbed it, it felt heavy, and I also didn't see any tags on it like it was ours. So I assumed someone left their bag there. I stopped to bring it to the front to show Rick, and with him standing there, he suggested I open it to see if there was any identification in it. There was no ID or wallet in it, but plenty of small food items like jerky, chips, candy bars, similar to the impulse items, and some other random items like a pocket knife, toilet paper, and a towel. We all thought that maybe whomever it was planning on stealing stuff, but got spooked and just ditched the bag. Some of the items could have been from our store, but we had no way of knowing for sure. So Rick took the bag and put it in his office, and we continued on as normal. We noticed a few other items in the camping supplies and the other departments towards the back that seemed out of place too. One thing we noticed was a stepladder that employees used to get stuff off the top shelves for customers or for stocking stuff in the back. It was sitting in the middle of the aisle. Of course, that being a safety hazard, I asked on the walkie if anyone was using it or who left it out, and no one said they had used it. I was annoyed at first because either someone was lying or someone from the day crew left it out, but I just took it to the back and moved on. After several long hours, we finally finished inventory around 4 in the morning. We were delayed a few times due to unrelated situations, and maybe a few of us were slacking off, but we got it done. The store was going to be opening at 8 that morning, and I was working later that evening, so I was pretty ready to leave. We did a final walkthrough and made sure all the lights were off and things were locked up. As I mentioned, this was back in the 90s, so our systems were pretty simple. Lock and key style security. Hell, we only had cameras at the door and the registers. So the most security we had in the store was motion sensor lights. When we turned off the main lights, we had the 2 towards the sides that were always on, and the others kicked on only if there was motion. So after turning off the lights, we all walked to the front to get ready to leave when Rick pointed to the back, mentioning a light was on. I poked fun at one of the girls because they were supposed to turn it off, and they told me they did. So I just walked back to the office to turn it off when I noticed it was actually off. Since that meant motion set it off, I went back and told Rick, and I remember we all stood there thinking out loud, what could have set it off? Did something fall off a shelf? Maybe the AC caused something to shift or move and cause it to go off. But Rick was more than ready to go home and sleep in a bed instead of an office chair, and said not to worry about it. So we all started to head out. We all got outside and to our cars when I realized I couldn't find my keys. It was like I was meant to stay there until my next shift with how things were going. It was 4 in the morning after all, so I'm sure my mind wasn't all there and forgot to grab them from my locker. So I had to quickly flag down Rick before he left. Thankfully, I caught him and he handed me the keys to go in and get them. I ran up to the store, unlocked it, and walked in, and began to run towards the back when I noticed again the light in the camping gear kicked on. I tried to ignore it as I went and got my keys, but when I came back out and I heard what sounded like something falling, I couldn't not check it out. I swiftly walked over to it and again saw the stepladder sitting by the tent shelf, knocked over on its side. Now this time I knew for a fact I had put that ladder up, so I was confused and cautious about what to do next. As I stood there staring down the aisle, I started hearing what sounded like someone very quietly talking to themselves or whispering very softly. I couldn't make out any words, but I could definitely tell it was there. I either had the choice of walking to the front and calling 911, leaving, or attempting to confront whatever it was. I was young and naive, but I thought I could definitely handle whatever it was, so I decided to proceed. I walked up to the stepladder and looked around to see the tent slightly moving. Since you had to use the stepladder to get closer to it, I moved it to the side and, in the most threatening voice I could muster, I yelled at them to show themselves. After what felt like forever, whoever was in there stopped moving, slowly unzipped the tent, and tried to quickly jump out of it. I think they thought they could make the jump, but quickly stumbled into the shelf in front of us, knocking it over. He quickly ran off, and I took chase as he ran to the employee back rooms. As I ran around the corner, I heard a familiar voice shout out for me, and I turned around to see Rick running towards me. I tried explaining to him what happened when he told me to go call 911 while he stood at the doors. There was only one exit in the back. That was an emergency exit, but it was locked when we were closed. So if he was going to get out, he would have to come back to where Rick was now standing. I went and called 911, and While I was on the phone with them, I could hear shouting. Once I finished, I set the phone down like the operator told me to and ran out to check on Rick to see him wrestling someone to the ground. So, to not turn this into a pay-per-view match, the cop showed up and restrained this guy as we gave our side of things. This guy looked normal for the most part. He had decent looking clothes on, he had a buzz cut and a short beard, and seemed pretty coherent. What we learned though was he looked clean because he had taken some of the hunting clothes we sold. He was wearing a pair of camo pants and a fisherman's shirt. His clothes and some of his claimed belongings were in that tent, including a razor, some soap, and a few things of food. We also learned that the backpack was his, and he admitted he had taken some items from the store. This man had been living in that tent for a few weeks now. He came in at some point during the day and knew where to stay hidden till we closed up. However, he didn't realize we were going to be there late doing inventory, so he had to quickly scramble to get in the tent and forgot to grab his backpack. I've thought about it on occasions because that guy had a knife in the backpack as well. If he had it, would he have attempted to use it on one of us? And something even more startling to me was I had never seen this guy before. We had regulars, and I saw people come and go, but for 2 weeks, this guy was here daily, and I never saw him. It was bizarre. It definitely made me more aware of my surroundings, but I always remember this and play different scenarios in my head about what could have happened.